You see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, hold on. Let me turn that around. Hold on. Okay, hold on. Look at it. See it?
You remove that file. Can you remove that file?
Open it. Open it up. Open it up.
The microphone.
You ready? Step it.
Come on.
Stop.
Go.
Testing.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Liberia Radio Television Network. We're here live in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., where we call Atlanta Human Rights Commission. We are here for a hearing on accountability for war and external conflict in Liberia. So today is May 13th, and this hearing is supposed to start at 10 a.m. On May 2nd, President Joseph Dimokra signed the executive order to establish the war and crimes court in Liberia. So we are here today to have a hearing on that so that our key witnesses may provide suggestions to Congress on what will be the next step in establishing the war and economic crimes court. And just for more information, this hearing is being hosted by Congressman Chris Smith and also James B. McGovern of Congress. We have some key witnesses who will be on the panel here today. Dr. Organization. And on the panel as well, we have the Cindy Martin Plan, Executive Director for the Movement for Justice for Liberia. We also have Dr. Smith, Chief Investigator for the International Justice Group. Michael Rubin, Ajama Yatama Dexter, Elizabeth Elson. We're here, we're going to be looking at publish on this hearing right here. The nation's capital, specifically the Transnational Civil Rights Commission. So make sure you continue to follow the Liberia Radio Television Network. Make sure you are on fire as well. Again, stay tuned. We will bring you live coverage of that.
1989 and 2003, Liberians suffered through two civil wars in which, out of a population of roughly 3 million people, hundreds of thousands of people were killed, tens of thousands of them civilians butchered in atrocities and war crimes, including mass rapes and amputations. More than 1 million people were displaced. Liberians have not yet seen justice for these atrocities. They have yet, uh, there has not been the kind of accountability and closure that is required. In 2003, a comprehensive peace agreement signed in Accra, Ghana, ended the civil war. It called for the establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or TRC. In 2005, the TRC began its work and, in its turn, recommended an extraordinary criminal tribunal to be set up to achieve accountability for the war crimes and atrocities that were committed during Charles Taylor's reign of terror. The Liberian Congress passed legislation requiring the implementation of the TRC's recommendation, but the implementation never happened. Years went by. Presidents made promises which went unfulfilled. Notorious war criminals played leading roles in Liberian public life, and a moral fog continued to enshroud Liberia. This year, there has been dramatic progress, and it seems that the fog will start to lift. A new president was inaugurated in January, Joseph Boakai, and he announced that his government would create a quote, an office to explore the feasibility for the establishment of war and economic crimes court to judicially sanction, quote, those who bear the greatest responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Then in April, Liberia's House and Senate jointly approved a resolution calling for the creation of the two courts, quote, an extraordinary criminal court and domestic corruption court for war and economic crimes. On May 2nd, 2024, the president issued an executive order providing for the establishment of an office of the War and Economic Crimes Court for Liberia. Its task is to, quote, investigate, design, and prescribe the methodology, mechanisms, and the processes for the establishment of a special war crimes court for Liberia and a national anti-corruption court for Liberia. The question now facing the office of the War and Economic Crimes Court is this: how best to proceed to establish the court? Many countries have faced this question, from the Nuremberg Court and the International Criminal Court for the former Yugoslavia, and consulting widely on experiences of other countries is simply part of the process in establishing a court to try such crimes. I would note parenthetically that I was very involved with the Court for Yugoslavia. I chaired the Helsinki Commission, and when it looked like that was lagging, offered legislation that did pass, at least in the House, but sent a message that we needed to get money upfront into that court to hold Milosevic and others to account for their despicable crimes. We will go into detail today about these and with our very distinguished witnesses. The executive order continues many excellent provisions, and they will comment on the order and offer input, which is so vitally necessary. I believe Sierra Leone's experience is particularly important for Liberia. Sierra Leone had a war crimes tribunal, the Special Court for Sierra Leone, which convicted Charles Taylor for aiding and abetting war crimes and crimes against humanity in that country. This helped that country heal the wounds of its past divisions. And I would note Alan White's testimony will be extremely important here. President Molokai recognizes Dr. White as a trusted advisor and has personally requested him to assist in the establishment of the court. I would also note parenthetically that Alan White played the key role. He was amazing in that court for Sierra Leone in making sure that justice was done to the greatest extent possible, often at great risk to his life. He had so many death threats, and yet he persisted very, very heroically. I believe his assistance and advice will be an integral part of the next phase in this process. Congress has repeatedly recognized the importance of justice and accountability in Liberia, most recently in 2018 through H-Res 1055, offered by Congressman Dan Donovan in New York, calling for the establishment of an extraordinary criminal court. In 2017, I chaired a hearing of the Africa Subcommittee on the future of democracy and governance in Liberia. And in 2021, this commission held a hearing on establishing a war and economic crimes court for Liberia, which some of the witnesses were there that day, and I welcome them back. In the past, attention shown by Congress to Liberia has been helpful and appreciated by many Liberians. The United States and Liberia have a very special relationship. Liberia was founded by free American slaves and long led by them and their descendants, who both vigorously rejected slavery and all of its evils associated with it, and cherished and developed their relationship with the better aspects of the old country. As Juneteenth approaches, we have occasion to reflect on this relationship and the love of liberty that established Liberia. The responsibility and the opportunity for healing Liberia lies in the hands, of course, of the Liberian people. And we hope the insights and exchanges offered today will be useful to them in that vital work. I'd like to now yield to the distinguished co-chair, Jim McGovern.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everybody. The title of the hearing today is Liberia, Next Steps Toward Accountability for War and Economic Crimes. The topic is timely. Last month, on May 2nd, Liberian President Joseph Boakai signed an executive order to establish an office of a War and Economic Crimes Court for Liberia. The mandate of the office is to investigate, design, and prescribe the methodology, mechanisms, and the processes for the establishment of a special war crimes court, as well as a national anti-corruption court. A war crimes court has been a long-standing demand of the victims and survivors of Liberia's two civil wars. Between 1989 and 2003, as many as 250,000 Liberians are believed to have been killed and 1 million displaced. Horrific atrocities were committed by all sides, including extrajudicial executions, torture, rape, forced labor, and extortion. The 2009 final report of Liberia's Truth and Reconciliation Commission called for the creation of an extraordinary criminal tribunal to address these crimes. Unfortunately, the past two presidents dragged their feet. So to see concrete progress now, 15 years later, is encouraging. This is good news at a moment when there's not a lot of that to go around. Accountability in Liberia is an issue that has historically had strong bipartisan support. The Biden administration is already deeply engaged, led by Beth Van Schok, our excellent ambassador for global criminal justice. I was looking forward to receiving recommendations from our witnesses as to how Congress can best support what will surely be a groundbreaking initiative. I have to say, because I just got the testimonies last night, having read them, I think some of what the public might hear today, in my opinion, doesn't live up to the advertising. It seems to be a clearly kind of coordinated smear job, if you will. Several of the witnesses are going to attack certain human rights defenders and organizations by name. And one will go further and attack the entire human rights movement, as well as Ambassador Van Schok. We will have witnesses that will offer, serious grounded recommendations on the next steps we're supposed to talk about, and I'm looking forward to that. But I think it's worth reminding everyone that accountability requires due process, and presenting allegations that are not substantiated in a public forum in which those targeted have no voice, no opportunity to defend themselves, I think is the exact opposite of what human rights is about. And I think those who engage in that kind of practice, I think, undercut our commitment to human rights. So I want to be clear that some of what is going to be said today, I'm going to take issue with, and I regret that. But without objection, I move to submit for the record a forthcoming statement from the State Department's Office of Global Criminal Justice, an October 2021 press release from the U.S. Embassy in Liberia titled "Ambassador McCarthy Commends Hassan Bilati Global Justice Research Project," and a press release titled "U.S. Federal Court Awards Damages to Liberian Victims of Lutheran Church Massacre," about a Pennsylvania court's historic damages award to 4 survivors of one of the worst episodes of Liberia's Civil War. The survivors were represented by the Center for Justice and Accountability, with support from the Global Justice and Research Project. And with that, again, I thank our witnesses for being here, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now introduce our distinguished panel, beginning first with Dr. Alan White. He's the former Chief of Investigations for the United Nations-backed Special Court for Sierra Leone. As Chief of Investigations, he directed and supervised all criminal investigations of the Office of the Prosecutor. Those investigations led to the indictment of 13 individuals, including former Liberian President Charles Taylor, who was convicted of war crimes and sentenced to 50 years in prison. Dr. White currently serves as co-executive director of the Advocacy Foundation for Human Rights. We'll then hear from Yacindy Martin, who is co-founder and executive director of the Movement for Justice in Liberia. She is also co-founder of Oxygen, a subsidiary of the Alliance of Liberia Women International that provides free education on gender-based violence and educational assistance to underprivileged children and victims of gender-based violence in Liberia. She has coached and mentored many women and children from all walks of life as a community organizer and is the director of the oldest African immigrant community in Georgia, the Liberian Association of Metropolitan Atlanta. We'll then hear from Alvin Smith, who is a criminal justice, homeland security, and counterterrorism expert. He currently serves as the chief investigator for the International Justice Group in Washington, D.C. He is a candidate for Master of Arts in International Relations and Global Security with a concentration on conflict resolutions at American Military University. He has been certified by the United States Department of Defense and other agencies, as Alvin Smith has been deployed with the NATO Security Mission Force Protection, as well as with the U.S. Department of Defense. We'll then hear from Michael Rubin, who for nearly 20 years has been a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Mr. Rubin previously worked in the Office of the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon, edited Middle East Quarterly, and taught classes relating to the Middle East, Africa, and Central Asia at sea for the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. He is currently Director of Policy Analysis at the Middle East Forum. He is the author of several books, several dozen academic articles, book chapters on or encyclopedia entries, and more than 2,000 opinion essays in U.S. newspapers. We'll then hear from Adama Kiatamba Dempster, who is the United States International Visitors Leadership Program Fellow on Transnational Justice in Africa and the United States. He is a 2023 recipient of the Peace and Justice Award from the Center for Africa Peace and Conflict Resolution at California State University, and is a prominent award-winning human rights activist, director, and global ambassador. He is currently the National Secretary General and co-founder of the Civil Society Human Rights Advocacy Platform of Liberia, and lead campaigner for the Coalition for the Establishment of War Crimes and Economic Crimes Court. We'll then hear from Elizabeth Evanson, who is the International Justice Director at Human Rights Watch, previously an Associate Director in the International Justice Program. Her research and advocacy centered on the International Criminal Court, monitoring the court's institutional development, and conducting advocacy towards court officials and its member countries. She joined Human Rights Watch in 2006 as a Leonard Sandler Fellow in the Africa Division of Human Rights Watch, focused on Uganda. During periods of leave from Human Rights Watch, Liz served as a civil society program officer with No Peace Without Justice, Libya's project, and as the Secretariat Director of the Coalition for the International Criminal Court. I'd like to now ask Dr. Alan White if he could proceed.
Thank you. At the onset, I would like to commend Congressman Smith and co-chairman Congressman James McGovern of this commission. You've been an integral part of supporting this. Congressman Smith has been a strong advocate and voice for the Liberian people in exposing corruption and seeking justice and accountability for the victims of human rights violations. Led by Congressman Smith, we passed House Resolution 1055 endorsing the Liberian Truth and Reconciliation recommendation to establish the War and Economic Crime Court. This is the second hearing by this commission on establishing the War and Economic Crime Court. It's hard to believe, but nearly 3 years ago, the first hearing was held on June 21st, 2021. As you rightly mentioned, a lot has happened since the first hearing. I'd just like to recap. And since that time, the Advocacy Foundation for Human Rights has been working tirelessly to establish the War and Economic Crime Court for Liberia. On November 18, 2023, Joseph Boakai was elected as President-elect of the Republic of Liberia and sworn in on January 22nd, 2024. Because of our 20-year plus international justice experience and support for the establishment of the War Crimes Court for Liberia, he sought the foundation's assistance.
White, if you could just bring the mic a little bit closer.
Okay, sure. Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Thank you.
Okay. Establishing the court was a top priority in the United States, and this was reiterated to the foundation in discussions with U.S. Embassy officials in Monrovia. Since those meetings, the embassy has issued several public statements in support of the court. So we have worked closely with U.S. Embassy to advance this important policy. The foundation is also assisting the Liberian government establish known modalities for the court by using processes similar to those that were used in the establishment of the UN-backed Special Court for Sierra Leone. By using these international standards, the Liberian court can effectively prosecute war and economic crime court under international law. As you mentioned, the Liberian legislature, which we were there in attendance for that, passed joint resolution with 28 out of the 29 senators, only one abstaining in support of it, the establishment of the War and Economic Crime Court. The House concurred with it and approved it 2 days later on April 11th. President Boykai approved the measure on April 25th, 2024. On May 2nd, as you had mentioned, President Boykai held a press conference in the Executive Mansion in Monrovia before he signed the executive order establishing the Office and War and Economic Crimes Court. It's important for you to know what he said, and I will read a brief portion of his statement. Quote, I invited you all here to join me in consummating a process that will set in motion deliberate action steps towards bringing justice and closure to the scars and memories of our tragic and violent misadventure into the more 14 years of senseless civil conflict. Through several years following the silencing of the guns, we as people have endured downpours of agony, an avalanche of recriminations, and clarion calls from either victims or alleged perpetrators. The conviction that brings us here today is that for peace and harmony to have a chance to prevail, justice and healing must perfect the groundwork. I acknowledge the historic move by our national legislature, both the House of Representatives and House of Senate, to reach separate and then a joint resolution urging the nation to take tangible steps, paving the way to bringing justice, healed and reconciled finality, the issues of that ugly period of our past. The direct representatives of the people spoke their collective and overwhelming vote as they passed the resolution. And so we must act and act now. As you rightly mentioned, he passed or he signed Executive Order 131 on that day, which was an historic day. This office, also as mentioned, will be led by an executive director, which will be soon to be appointed, who will be responsible for facilitating the establishment of the court. The temporal jurisdiction has not been formally established yet. However, under the terms of the executive order, it's likely to hear war crime cases that occurred as far back as 1979 and through October 2003, when the hostilities were formally ending after the Second Civil War. The foundation has worked closely with President Boykai and the leaders in the House and the Senate. They are genuinely committed to establishing the War and Economic Crime Court for Liberia. They have listened intently to the people of Liberia, and under the leadership there's been President Boykai, there's been tremendous process as a result of his leadership. The current government inherited empty coffers by the previous government. It will need help from the international community to establish the court. The U.S. State Department has repeatedly made it clear that it will provide funding and technical support. During the June 2021 hearing, the Commission offered its bipartisan support and called for U.S. funding. U.S. financial support is absolutely critical. The Liberian people want an end to impunity and reestablish the rule of law. The court can afford the Liberian people retributive and restorative justice. Both are essential in order to the nation to heal and move on, like its neighbor, Sierra Leone. Congressman Smith and other members of Congress have publicly been supportive of the establishment of the court. Now is the time for the entire U.S. Congress to be there for the Liberian people and to provide the necessary financial and political support as they did in Sierra Leone. Unlike any other country, the historical ties between Liberia and the U.S. date back to 1822, and to make this endeavor for justice even more significant, consequential. Until impunity ends, those who committed the heinous crimes spanning 2 decades are brought to justice. There can be no reconciliation. Many of the war criminals are senior government officials or elected officials who are still walking freely. This serves as a constant reminder to the victims of the wars and keeps the wounds of war festering. Bringing justice to the people of Sierra Leone allowed the nation to heal and move forward, which has led to unprecedented progress and development. Now is the time for Liberians to experience the same level of justice and move forward with reconciliation. Previous Liberian administrations have failed to stop impunity and corruption and bring justice to the people. Now President Boykai has kept his promise. The U.S. has a unique opportunity to join with an African leader who has the courage and tenacity to stand for justice and accountability. We're working hand in hand with the president, and I'm fully confident that President Boykai has set the Liberian justice on the right course. The establishment of the court must be in the same manner as the Special Court for Sierra Leone by treaty and/or agreement with the United Nations with the authority to prosecute international war crimes and crimes against humanity. The appointments of the prosecutor, registrar, and the majority of the judges must be done by the UN Secretary General to mitigate corruption and coercion and ensure transparency. This will allow the court to reestablish the rule of law and ensure accountability of those who perpetrated death, destruction, caused a civil war. Also, the executive order requires the establishment of an anti-corruption court subject to domestic jurisdiction and operating and guided by domestic jurisprudence with the power to adjudicate matters involving acts of corruption between 1979 to the present. We have seen the powerful and important justice and accountability is set for victims of any civil war. I saw that firsthand in Sierra Leone, how much it meant to victims to witness a powerful people who killed their loved ones be brought to justice. Although the Special Court for Sierra Leone was not a perfect institution, it did carry out justice impartially and transparently and prove that the rule of law is more powerful than the barrel of the gun. Despite the progress achieved in a relatively short period since President Boykai assumed office, now the hard work begins in establishing the court. There will be many challenges and efforts to undermine the establishment of the court. And we are aware of several NGOs who are trying to be involved in the establishment of the court, whose affiliation will be detrimental in doing so for purely personal and financial gain. Some of them have been criminally accused and civilly sued for engaging in criminal conspiracies to maliciously prosecute individuals for war crimes and conspire to suborn perjury by coaching witnesses to lie. One case involves a $15 million U.S. lawsuit for malicious prosecuting for providing false affidavits that led to an arrest of an individual who was placed in solitary confinement for 2 years and 3 months. That defendant was Agnes Reeves Taylor, former wife of Charles Taylor, who was falsely accused of torture and ordering the execution of Amos Bond, a former Liberian superintendent in Liberia. However, Bond is alive and currently living in London. Witnesses have come forward claiming they were coached to provide false statements and false testimony and money in return by these NGOs. Additionally, these NGOs were involved in another malicious prosecution of Jibril Massaquoi, who's a protected witness for me at the Special Court of Sierra Leone. So I know this case firsthand. After testifying for the court, he was relocated to Finland in 2008. In 2008, 2 of those NGOs conspired to maliciously prosecute him and provided false statements to the National Bureau of Investigation and the Ministry of Justice in Finland. Their information was used in an open investigation that led to the arrest of Massaquoi. He was accused of killing and eating people in Liberia in July of 2003. However, there's a problem with that. In October of 2002, he was in my witness protection program. So we never left Sierra Leone, and he was under 24-hour supervision by armed personnel of the witness protection section at the court. Also during that time, as the chief of investigations, I occasionally visited our protected witnesses, including Massaquoi. So I saw him personally myself. So I knew these allegations against him were false. Unfortunately, the Finnish government relied on false statements and information from coach witnesses, and Massaquoi was arrested and detained for 2 years. He went through 2 trials. He was publicly humiliated and pressed based on false information provided by the police and press statements issued by NGOs. During the appeals trial, Massaquoi was acquitted once again, and many of the witnesses admitted that they had been coached to lie under oath and received money from these NGOs. They will be identified later in this hearing. Additionally, there have been 2 criminal complaints that have been filed against those NGOs in Liberia, one with the Inspector General of Liberia National Police and the other with the Liberia Attorney General for conspiracy to maliciously prosecute and conspiracy to suborn perjury by coaching witnesses to lie against them. Unfortunately, the U.S. government is supporting the direct engagement of those same two NGOs with the establishment of this war crimes court. Notably, the U.S. government has used services of these two NGOs and relying on them for criminal prosecutions in the U.S. and elsewhere. In order to make sure that this is a credible and transparent court, the U.S. government must sever all ties from those two NGOs and their affiliates. Further, the U.S. government must ensure that these two NGOs and their affiliates are not involved with the establishment or operations of this court. Since the U.S. government supports and works with these two NGOs, there must be some oversight of these NGOs and subject to congressional oversight, investigations, and hearings, and perhaps inspector general investigations for conflicts of interest. Finally, one of the serious problems that we experienced with the Special Court for Sierra Leone was funding. It is critical that this court have a stable and predictable annual budget. I strongly believe that the U.S. Congress needs to continue to be fully supportive of the establishment of this court and provide the necessary funding in seed funding and annual appropriations to make sure the court is viable. Other international donors may assist. However, the U.S. Congress needs to ensure that proper funding is there to avoid a negative impact on the operations of the court. Funding of this court is the most critical phase in order to move forward in establishing the War Crimes Court. Congress will play a critical role. Thank you for your outstanding leadership and tireless efforts for human rights around the world.
Thank you very much, Dr. White. That was very, very powerful. And again, let the record again show that the absolutely essential role you played in bringing not only Charles Taylor but several others to justice. So always appreciative of that. I'd like to now recognize Ms. Martin for her testimony.
The chairman and distinguished member of the Tourmalin's Human Rights Commission, United States Congressional Hearing. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to acknowledge and thank you for the opportunity to hear our story. 3 years, June 21st, 2021. The story about the Liberian women, children, and the civil crisis. We are forever grateful for this hearing and for this commission, the opportunity to add our voice to the next step. Let me also thank the United States government that gave many of us a second chance and created a safe place for a safe place for us not only to live, but to also grow and develop. This commission has given a voice and a face to the women and children who endure 14 years of horror called the Liberian Civil War. This war impacted every town and village in Liberia. To introduce myself, my name is Yasendi Martin Peye. I was born in Liberia. I was a victim of the First Civil War. I am one of hundreds of thousands of Liberians who were victimized by the Civil War and mass atrocity committed during this time. It has been my personal mission to seek justice and accountability for the 250,000 Liberians who were killed and for the victims affected by the Civil War. So today I'm here on behalf of the Movement of Justice for Liberia, a nonprofit organization based in Atlanta, Georgia. Our organization advocates for women and children groups that were disproportionately adversely impacted by the Liberian Civil War. I stand on the shoulder of Liberian civil rights and advocates group that have campaigned for the right of Liberians. Our organization works along with other human rights organizations in gathering grassroots support for the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court for Liberia. I would like to acknowledge the effort of the group that gathered over 300,000 signatures, Liberians across Liberia, and those signatories that show the eminent needs for justice and accountability. Those signatures were presented here as a petition in 2022. Congressman Smith, you will recall on May 22nd, we presented the original petition to you at the step of the Capitol to demonstrate to you the unwavering and relenting desire of the people of Liberia for the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court. Those petitions were followed by an open letter to President Joseph Boakai on the potential pitfall of the Executive Order 131. On the occasion of the signing of the executive order, to explore the process leading to the establishment of the War Crime Tribunal and an anti-corruption code in Liberia. Some of the pitfalls include others who will try to exploit the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court for personal gain and not for the people of Liberia, which I will discuss later in my testimony. The need for justice and accountability. Today, appearance before you further the effort for justice and accountability in Liberia. I am appearing today to reflect on the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Liberia, the TRC, and to reflect on the war that robbed me of my childhood, the result for which we continue to struggle. The work from the TRC recommended the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court, the WECC, for Liberia, and created the roadmap to the nation of my birth. We are here to add our voice to those of Liberia seeking progression on the work of the TRC. Next step, toward accountability for the War and Economic Crimes Court. Reflection on the Liberian War, or reflection on the Liberian crisis. In 1990, while we were living in Liberia during the war, my mother gathered my siblings and I together and warned us that there were rebels in the country and were fighting a war. They were reportedly coming for the president, Samuel Kanyon Doe. We have gone through horrible experiences during the years of Doe. The street were turned into killing field, with bodies being discovered as they turned into weeks. As the war engulfed Liberia, children were taken from their parents, drugged, conscripted for killing purposes. Women and girls were conscripted, adopted, and became properties of fighters on both sides of the conflict. At times, we heard cries of men pleading for their lives. Sometimes, I still hear them. I still hear those voices. On July 31st, 1998, I remember when a doctor from the ELWA hospital in Monrovia brought to the Greystone compound an annex of the U.S. Embassy near Monrovia in our refuge place, a young man who had survived the Lutheran church massacre in Cinco. The survivor, Jimmy, has several wounds that exposed the internal organs. When Jimmy was discovered, he had been butchered and left for dead. After months in Greystone compound, my mother decided it was time for us to leave and seek refuge in the neighboring Sierra Leone. As we tracked out of the compound through Monrovia, the scene was unbelievable. The river filled with young and old bloated bodies, male and female. We encountered soldiers of two rebel groups, children with bloodthirsty eyes, with no human feeling. The scene in the movie Blood Diamond provide male depiction of mine experience. Next, we tracked out of Brewerville, where we were cut in the middle of fight between two rebel groups. After the fight had subsided, all houses were checked, and those that sought refuge from the fight were lined up to be killed. I witnessed an incident where the woman was ordered to be raped by her son. Afterward, she was killed. When the commander returned to the next group, but through some miraculous intervention, the commander, Colonel Vining of IMPFL, called off the execution of those that had been cut and lined up, including my family and me. My story and shared experience are not unique. There are listless Liberians with similar stories. Why I advocate for justice and accountability. This experience has shaped my fight for justice. The experience framed my advocacy for women and children. This experience occurred in the first phase of the Civil War. We believe hopelessness is the enemy of justice. Unfortunately, our people increasingly losing hope. Some of our people are slowly departing from this world without realizing justice for their loved one. In 2020, Tory Wall, an advocate for justice who lost her father, Dr. Victor Wall, departed this world without seeing justice that she so yearned for. And we also lost one of the signatories from the 3,000 signatories, from the 300,000 signatories um, in 2022. Ms. Deviata Tule, a survivor and a victim, whose two children were killed by the MPFL rebels. Her husband beheaded, his car used at a checkpoint while making their way to the IMPFL for help after the murder of her children without getting the justice that she fought for. Equally, the perpetrator of the war are also passing or getting old, and their memories are failing. As a survivor of the Civil War, I experienced the result of human shortcoming, the weakness that people were willing to go through in the name of power. Our witness unimaginable. The extent to which people will exert pain, cruelty, human suffering on vulnerable population for temporary pleasure and greed. Those experiences scar my memory. Although those scars are not visible, their psychological effects will be long lasting. We can surmise that the war was not about the redemption of our people. After the death of Doe in September 1990, the fighting did not end. Instead, other warring factions sprung up. The UNIMO K, UNIMO J, AFL, LPC, the Model, the LDF, the Lord, ATU sprung up, extended the conflict to 14 years. The urgent and caution need for justice and accountability. I believe Liberia is at an extremely crucial moment in time, almost 21 years since the cessation of the civil conflict. You remain our last hope for justice based on our relationship. That is the United States government, the Congress. With you as a leader of the free world, many of the survivors have reached the point of a boiling point. We speak not only for justice that is long overdue, but to protect the future from what the women and children of Liberia endure and continue to endure. I appear today on behalf of Movement of Justice and the women and children to support the process leading to establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court. We seek justice for the victim of Liberia civil conflict. We seek justice for those who have departed this world, seeking justice for their loved ones in Liberia. While we seek justice and accountability for the victims of the war, we also caution how false allegation and fraudulent processes that tend noble goals and objectives when person interests supersede national interests. There are individuals and organizations who have accused individuals of committing war crimes, and those cases have been prosecuted. During trial, there were allegations of witness tampering and coaching in 2020. We wrote an article in the Spotlight newspaper questioning those involved in the coaching of witnesses. In one instance, we flew to Liberia and met with Darius Toer. Mr. Toer provided an insider account on the practice of recruitment and coaching. Mr. Toer testified before the world at the Jibril Massacre trial that he had worked along with Mr. Hassan Belidi on fraudulent war crimes trial. We have waited so long for justice, and now we learn that Mr. Hassan Belidi, one who has proven to be involved in witness coaching scheme that coach people to provide false information and lie under oath for personal and financial gain, cannot be affiliated with the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court. We are baffled by the United States government, who support Belidi and other involved in coaching witnesses to lie and be a part of the court. I urge the Congress not to lead not to let the US government to allow Billy or any affiliate to be involved in any way of the establishment of the code, as they will undermine the credibility and to do irreparable harm to the court by turning it from the beginning. The people of Liberia deserve court that everyone can believe is just, transparent, free. People that can have that have been involved in criminal activities.
Ms. Martin, if you could sum up.
Yes, I'm finishing up. I would like to close with this quote from the United Nations Special Representative to Liberia, Jack Lang, in an interview with War Chronicle in 2004. He stated, the poor of Liberia were forgotten for so long. Member of the commission, you can help us remember the poor of Liberia. Support the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court in Liberia to bring accountability. This will provide remembrance of the forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you so very, very much. Mr. Smith.
Yes, sir. My name is Alvin Smith, Chief Investigator for the International Justice Group based in Washington, D.C. I'm honored to appear before the chairman, co-chairman, and members of the Tom Blanton Human Rights Bipartisan Commission. I would like to personally thank both co-chairman Smith and Congressman McGovern of this commission holding this very important hearing as we move forward in discussing the next step towards for war crime and accountability. In your previous hearing, you both supported the establishment of war and economic crime for Liberia in seeking justice and accountability for the 250,000 victims that lost their lives in the 2 civil wars in Liberia. As we will discuss today, the current Liberian President, Joseph Boakai, has taken the step establishing the War and Economic Crime Code for Liberia. For the past 10 years, I served as Chief Investigator for the International Justice Group. The IJG is a US-based non-governmental organization in the Washington, D.C. area. Joining the IJG, it gave me an opportunity to advance support for the establishment of the War and Economic Crime Code for Liberia. Currently, I work in the global security sector as a United States government contractor with experience in criminal justice, homeland security, and counterterrorism. I hold a master's degree in criminal justice with concentration in homeland security. Recently, I completed my studies for a master's degree in international relations and global security with concentration in conflict resolution. As a global security specialist, I have served in war countries such as Bosnia and the former Yugoslavia Republic, and witnessed the aftermath of war, abuse of human rights, and witness war crimes that were committed in that conflict. In support of the RJ mission to Liberia, I have employed my education and experience to conduct investigations and research, document human rights violations and other offenses. The RJG is chartered to conduct many responsibilities, but we have focused on Liberia and reporting on human rights violations, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, studying and investigating involved parties. We disclosed our funding for the Global Magnitsky Act sanctions in Liberia and other activities. We support the War and Economic Crime Code for Liberia and demand justice and accountability for all Liberians. Councillor Jerome Vradio, our executive director, was the former chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of the Republic of Liberia and the major author of the 2009 recommending the court's establishment. Nevertheless, we have received plethora information regarding varieties of NGOs expressing interest to participate in the Liberian War and Economic Crime Court process. These NGOs with my forensic investigative background are being involved with witnesses recruitment, coaching, and paying them to make false statements against war actors. Their process, they will obtain the phone number of the targeted persons, social media information for identification purposes, and addresses. Upon obtaining this information, they will prepare a fraudulent affidavit on an oath for the person to be arrested. Dara Stewart, an insider witness, provided this information while I was visiting in Liberia, conducting investigation. Dara Stewart was recruited, coached, paid by ability, flown to Accra, where he met the British Metropolitan Police team headed by one Gary Titley. I can provide his information. And he made false statement against Mrs. Agnes Reed Taylor for her rearrest. After that, Mr. Warner and Mr. Ability provided false statement that Agnes Reed Taylor in 1990 gave instruction, two different statements. The first one said she shot and killed Amos Bond. The second one, she gave instruction for Amos Bond execution. And another witness was provided called Leo Vavlikane. Leo Vavlikane was provided that Agnes Reed Taylor tortured her during the Liberian Civil War. Based upon those two statements, she was arrested and placed in solitary confinement for 27 months. Upon verification that Amos Bond was alive, and Leo Vavli, because of a false statement, he got granted asylum by the British government in the UK. Maurice Jabate, another witness, also lied on an oath. After the case fell apart, Agnes Reed Taylor got released. Jibril Massacre, a United Nations protected witness by the Sierra Leone Back Code, Benedict gave two contradictory statements against Jibril Massacre. As the case went further, he added 6 more statements that he was being tortured by Jibril Massacre. In 2002, Jibril Massacre was sent by Police Director Joe Tate in 2002. Joe Tate died in a plane crash in 1999. How can he come from his grave and be able to send Jibril Massacre to torture you? All of the witnesses from the Defense Council cross-examined witnesses produced by Ability and Warner. The witnesses said they were paid to lie. And after the testimony, they will give them the balance payment. Monsieur and the American Belgian citizen was lied on for gun running, blood diamond, etc., by Ability and Honor. He was put on trial. False witnesses came forward. Affidavit were full of flaws. And then he so embarrassed, he committed unintended death tantamount to involuntary manslaughter. In my conclusion, with evidence available to the International Justice Group and court records, Arlene Warner, a Swiss lawyer, executive director, Civitas Maxima, Geneva, Switzerland, should not come anywhere near this court for Liberia. Mr. Hassan Belete, executive director, Global Justice Research Project, should not come anywhere near this court. Center for Justice and Accountability, California, Switzerland, they cannot come anywhere near this court. Ambassador Bevan Shark is conflicted. Councillor Jerome Verdier wrote her a letter. You cannot be on the board of these NGOs who are conflicted in lying on people. You have to recruit yourself. She recruits herself on people, but she's still affiliated with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now welcome his testimony, Michael Rubin, who's doing it remotely. He'll be joining us in a second or two. Mr. Rubin?
Thank you. Yes. Chairman Smith and McGovern, honorable members, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Don't worry, I will be brief. The bottom line up front is that we should support the War and Economics Crimes Court and parallel anti-corruption court, but we must ensure both operate with unquestioned integrity. While the topic today is the effort to win justice for Liberians and bring accountability to those who exploited and abused Liberians during decades of civil war, much more is at stake. A series of human rights groups appear to have taken pay-to-play corruption to a new level in Liberia. For several years, Civitas Maxima, a non-governmental organization founded by Swiss lawyer Alan Werner, poached witnesses to give false testimony in a war crimes prosecution for profit scheme. The unwillingness of Western partners to perform due diligence on partners enabled Civitas Maxima to claim many sponsors and collaborators, including the Department of State and the Center for Justice and Accountability, where current U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice, Beth Van Schaak, previously worked. At issue is more than reputational damage. Civitas Maxima's scheme and the Center for Justice and Accountability's lack of due diligence have cost lives and upended legal cases on 3 continents. Rather than recognize flaws in their methodology and mitigate shoddy human rights practices, Werner tries to muzzle criticism via lawfare. During President Bakai's inaugural address, he pledged to stand up the office of a War and Economic Crimes Court. The United States can and should support Liberia and human rights by ensuring Bakai can keep his pledge amid many forces that fear transparency and justice. Before a new appropriation cycle, this will require the State Department to reprogram funds to support the court. Such funds might also ensure international technocrats and investigators can work side by side in pursuit of justice. America's brand should be human rights. The State Department, however, must also recognize the sensitivities arising out of predatory human rights groups. Unfortunately, Van Schaak has little, if any, credibility in Liberia because of her continuing professional relationship with Hassan Bilati, the head of the Global Justice and Research Project, as well as Werner. The person should never trump the principle. Simply put, the State Department should allow the Office of Global Criminal Justice to recuse itself from any future work with Liberia's War and Economic Crimes Court, given Van Schaak's links to groups engaged in alleged fraud. The Werner Bilati scandal, however, highlights the need to address post-2003 corruption. It is essential to simultaneously create an anti-corruption court to try those whose corruption has undermined Liberian democracy and stability over the subsequent 2 decades, and especially during the time of the previous president, George Weah. Von Schacht should testify willingly, given that multiple witnesses have now, under oath, revealed the coaching and fraud that her partners and grantees supported. Chairman McGovern, I appreciate your concerns voiced in your opening statement, but my concern is neither personal nor partisan, but rather rests on concerns about how the fruit of the poisonous vine could undermine the court. Make no mistake, America's brand should be transparency and anti-corruption. It should not participate in cover-up for political convenience. Liberians deserve better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Rubin, for that testimony and for being so concise as you were. I do have some questions for you later, but I'd like to now yield to Mr. Dempster for his testimony. And he's coming in remotely as well.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Good morning and good afternoon. Good morning from Liberia. Good afternoon from Liberia. Good morning, DC. Can you hear me?
Perfectly. Thank you. Can you hear us?
Sir.
Please proceed.
Hello? Okay. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair of this commission, thanks for the invitation for allowing my participation and to testify before you in the interest of Liberia's war crimes. I will go directly to my computer to do my presentation, but I quickly want to ask Co-Chairman Smith if I am allowed to ask a question before my presentation or after I can ask a question.
Of course, as part of your testimony, ask away.
So I follow vividly your introductory statement about Dr. White, and I heard, if I'm correct, about him being appointed as a vassal by President Boakai. And of course, if that is the case, we from civil society and the local media here are not aware of such information, but of course it's new to us. I just wanted to, raise that before I go into my presentation. I will now move to my computer so that I will do the presentation. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, on behalf of the human rights community, civil society, war victims, survivors, and justice campaigners in Liberia and the Liberians in the diaspora, I extend heartfelt thanks for this opportunity to address your commission on the accountability for atrocities committed during the 14 years of civil war in Liberia. I am Adam Dempster, of course, head of the Civil Society Human Rights Advocacy Platform of Liberia and lead campaigner for the Coalition for the Establishment of War and Economic Crimes in Liberia. Our organizations tirelessly advocate for justice and the establishment of the court to address impunity. My testimony will address a number of questions. To begin with, has to do with the role of civil society. During Liberia's civil wars, gross human rights violations were recorded by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In 2003, the Human Rights Community Transitional Justice Actors were among civil society representatives who attended the Comprehensive Peace Agreement talks in Accra, Ghana, to negotiate an end to the widespread atrocities across Liberia and to advocate for the peace, a process that mandated the creation of the TRC in 2004 by an act of legislation that mandated investigation into the root causes of the conflict in Liberia and to make recommendations for implementation consideration. Section 46 of the TRC Act of 2004 referred to civil society organizations as moral guarantors of the CPA, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, to monitor and campaign for the full implementation of the TRC recommendations, including the establishment of War and Economic Crimes Court. Within this period, Liberians waited for over 20 years, hoping that justice would come one day. Barely in 3 months into his regime, President Joseph Numa Boakai-led government rekindled the hopes of the people when the 55th National Legislature made an unprecedented move on the establishment of a War and Economic Crimes Code by the historic signing and adoption of Resolution number 001/2004 in favor of the establishment of a War and Economic Crimes Code, enforced and supported by the landmark decision to sign Executive Order number 131 by His Excellency Joseph Numa Boakai, President of the Republic of Liberia, on May 2nd, 2004, as a sign of bringing closure to the culture of impunity in Liberia. The executive order also provided for the establishment of the Office of the War and Economic Crimes Court to facilitate and coordinate efforts leading to the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court in Liberia. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, a follow-up to his decision for the court after I attended the signing ceremony of the executive order on May 2nd, 2004, representing civil society, I had a meeting with President Joseph Numa Boakai and the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Liberia, Madam Sarah Beslo-Nyanti, this Tuesday, June 11, 2004, on the advice of the Foreign Minister to brief the President and gather feedback from him on his position toward the establishment of the court. Interestingly, this week, President Boakai reaffirmed his commitment to ensuring justice and accountability in Liberia, that his government is considering the appointment of officials to the office very soon to roll out the process on the establishment of the court. And he is looking forward to engaging civil society, regional and international human rights community, and the United Nations to support his vision on the establishment of the court. Civil society organizations, justice campaigners, women and youth groups, religious and traditional chiefs and elders, Bar Association of Liberian Female Lawyers convened a wider consultation regularly to mobilize and amplify support for the court over the years. They have been tirelessly campaigning for the establishment of the court despite facing significant backlashes. Civil society continue and remain the force that have bridged the gap between survivors and victims of the war and government, including technocrats. And civil society remain vocal along these lines. My second point is advocacy and lobbying. Advocacy efforts targeted policymakers, legislators, international partners to pursue for the court establishment over the years. Continuous engagement with stakeholders, including victims and survivors, and public information sharing are crucial. Leading a process of giving reparation support to victims, survivors, and communities that were affected by the Civil War is crucial to the operation of the court along the line. A proposal for the court structure. In the view of civil society, the proposed court is informed by the TRC report and international legal advice. Will be Liberia's first war crimes court. Civil society should be key members in the drafting of the court statutes and operations of the office. Civil society will have a pivotal role to play in outreach and ensuring that all stakeholders, including women survivors, victims, underrepresented minority groups, are heard as part of the process. I also speak on the role of international experts and international community. From a civil society perspective, we think international support is essential for technical assistance, infrastructure, security, and budgeting. We request the international community, including the US government, to provide legal advice and help Liberia organize a donor conference to support the court and its operation. However, international experts cannot supplant the vital role that must be played by Liberians. For this court to have a lasting impact on Liberian society, the rule of law must be a Liberian-led court. And my final position, civil society perspective. Civil society views the establishment of the court as a landmark development for justice and accountability, despite years of challenges and personal risks that we have gone through on the ground. Recommendations. We recommend that justice and accountability are vital for Liberia healing process and governance. Robust witness protections program, fair trials, right protections are necessary. Public education on the court's mandate and economic benefit are also crucial for the establishment of the court on the Liberian soil. Ensure reparation for victims and survivors of the Civil War. Ensure protection for human rights defenders inside Liberia. International support and collaborations are essential for the court successes. True peace requires justice, and the campaign must be inclusive, engaging various societal groups and media platforms to make this happen. As I conclude, the establishment of the War and Economic Crime Court in Liberia will be a significant step towards justice and accountability. It is imperative that both national and international efforts are aligned to ensure the success of this initiative. The US is a vital partner for Liberia in making this happen, drawing on the historical tie between the United States and Liberia dating back to the 1800s, when freed African Americans were returned from the United States. This is perfect, and we look forward to support from the United States government. And as I yield and allowed Mr. Chairman to come in, I am deeply troubled by the allegations that have been presented by all of my colleague witnesses on human rights defenders and organizations that we work with. So this is alarming. This is something that I think is worth discussing. I thought this hearing was a hearing to consolidate efforts so that we help Liberia, since we have a political will, to have a court established. But unfortunately, I work with Hassan Belete. I have no interference with his cases. We travel a lot. And then I also work with Ambassador Fangshat. She came to Monrovia. We organize civil society meetings. I work with CJA and Civita Maxima, all of these organizations. We work with them as human rights group on the ground. And these allegations are very troublesome. They are alarming. I don't know who's going to be the judge to draw a line of who participates in the establishment of the court and who should not advocate. So from what I'm getting, the feedback I'm getting as a leading member of the civil society, this is troublesome. I think human rights defenders should be protected. If there are issues along the way, I think those issues should be made evidence so that we see the true account of all that we hear from this technical hearing. It's important we've seen this, and it serves as a roadblock for most of the delay we face in the advocacy and campaign for the court to be established. So this is very much a concern for us. We want the commission to dive into it so that we find the true account of what's coming out so that Liberia justice will not be in any way spoiled by all these different allegations that will undermine the progress that we have spent more than 20 years working to achieve. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dempster. I'd like to now recognize Ms. Everson.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the co-chairs, to Congressman Smith and Congressman McGovern, for the opportunity to be here and to contribute to this discussion. I have a prepared statement on behalf of a number of organizations. Before I get into that, I just wanted to offer two reflections as I've listened to the statements of my co-witnesses here with quite some concern in terms of some of the information that's been presented. I think one reflection is it's important to remember that when we're talking about criminal cases and the future work of a Liberian war crimes court, judicial authorities take independent decisions. They conduct their own investigations and they take independent decisions about what cases to prosecute. And oftentimes it is civil society organizations that are the staunchest supporters of the independence of judicial institutions and speaking up loudly to make that clear. And the second reflection I wanted to offer, and I'll say a bit more about this in my prepared statement, is that it is unfortunately the case that all too often human rights defenders speaking up for justice around the world face threats to their physical safety and other efforts to intimidate and chill their efforts on behalf of victims and survivors. And to overcome those threats, they need the support of governments everywhere to protect the civic space that is actually necessary, a necessary ingredient for justice to go forward. My statement today is presented on behalf of my own organization, Human Rights Watch, but together with the Advocates for Human Rights, Civil Society Human Rights Advocacy Platform of Liberia, the Global Justice and Research Project, the Center for Justice and Accountability, Civitas Maxima, the Coalition for the Establishment of a War and Economic Crimes Court in Liberia, the Global Justice Center, and the Secretariat for the Establishment of War Crimes Court in Liberia. Together, our groups have been advocating for the establishment of a Liberian-led war crimes court in Liberia to address the legacy of impunity for the widespread and systematic violations of international human rights and humanitarian law that characterized the country's two brutal armed conflicts, which took place between 1989 and 2003. While there have been a number of important criminal and civil cases outside of Liberia, and these cases have actually contributed to the momentum we see now within the country for justice, to date, not a single person has faced criminal investigation or prosecution in Liberia for the serious crimes committed during the civil wars. As you've already heard from other witnesses, in its 2009 final report, the Liberian Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommended the creation of an extraordinary criminal court, which would be a hybrid court composed of Liberian and international judges, prosecutors, and other staff with a mandate to try those allegedly responsible for committing serious crimes. A legislative conference to talk about accountability was organized in Monrovia in 2019 with the legislature of Liberia, a Liberian coalition of NGOs, and international partners. And as you've heard this morning, there is now very welcome and renewed momentum after nearly 2 decades for the establishment of a court. The US government has played an absolutely critical role in advancing progress. We've heard about the efforts of this commission. I also wanted to mention the efforts of the US Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice, Beth Van Schaack, who has repeatedly voiced the government's partnership with Liberia in its journey to justice. Her commitments on behalf of the US government to support this process have been widely welcomed in Liberia. What is needed now is for President Boakai's administration, with the support of the international community, to translate stated commitment to a war crimes court into concrete steps for the court's creation. In our written statement, we have shared a number of recommendations we've made to the Liberian government. I just want to focus in my truncated remarks on a few key points. First, the process and the work of the court itself must be Liberian-led. This means primarily that Liberians who were impacted by the civil wars and have long advocated for accountability, have a leading voice in determining the court's trajectory. Liberian experts should also fill key positions in the judiciary, the prosecution, the defense, and the registry. Liberian ownership of the court is crucial to build and maintain local support for accountability processes. And ensuring the court benefits from Liberian experts will also ensure that investing in the court strengthens the domestic justice system. The first step towards ensuring that the court is Liberian-led is making sure that Liberians and regional experts play critical roles in the creation of the court. My second point goes back to my initial comments, which is to share with you that Liberian civil society who have been advocating for accountability in Liberia are doing so at great personal risk. Powerful actors opposed to accountability for wartime atrocities and former warlords hold positions of power in Liberia have often worked to undermine civil society's efforts. As a result, members of civil society have received threats to their security and to their work over the years, and these threats continue today. It's imperative that international partners, including the United States government, continue to support Liberian civil society organizations and the crucial work they are doing to see accountability in Liberia. And then finally, the process needs to be Liberian-led, but this is not at all in tension with the fact that it also needs international support. High-level messages from Liberia's international and regional partners in support of a court are needed to maintain the positive momentum we've seen in the last months. We look to the Liberian government to request international and regional support to help it to determine the best legal and structural modalities for the court's creation in a manner that will ultimately ensure fair, credible functioning of the court. And partners should pledge international support and expertise based on accumulated experience in many other situations. We recommend that the US Congress can do a few things to advance the process. First, to continue to make clear its support to a Liberian-led process to achieve justice in the country through the creation of a credible war crimes court and support to Liberian civil society organizations engaged in this effort. Second, to provide the requested support to the Liberian government and to civil society organizations working on behalf of justice. This could include assistance in developing the necessary legislation and systems for the protection of victims and witnesses, support in the legal representation of victims, and processes to engage meaningfully with the public and victims and survivors to create awareness of the objectives of a war crimes court and to allow Liberian voices to inform the design of the court. And finally, we look to the Congress to offer financial support for the court, as the US has done in several other contexts, including, for example, the annual contributions to the Special Criminal Court in the Central African Republic. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I want to apologize. I'm late for a hearing, so I'd like to request permission to submit some questions to the witnesses in writing, and I hope that you will respond. I mean, I just want to say that we heard a lot today. People were very, very thorough, but some things I heard worry me greatly, especially some of the attacks against human rights organizations. And I just want to know more about, like, for example, Mr. Smith, I'm trying to learn more about your organization, the International Justice Group, and I don't know if it's a 501c3 or if it's who funds it, or I couldn't find it on the web page. So I have some questions on that, and I think Dr. White, I think there's some confusion as to whether you formally work for the U.S. government in your capacity, and you'll clarify that, I'm sure, for the record. But again, there's a lot here, and I regret that I have to go, but I thank you for your indulgence.
The
And
rules, great.
yeah, and I thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Thank you all for your testimonies. This is the ongoing effort on the part. I mean, I've chaired hearings on my subcommittee. I chair the Human Rights Subcommittee, as well as the Lantos Commission, working with my friend and colleague, Jim McGovern. What we want is a tribunal that is absolutely, to the extent that it can be accomplished, completely fair, above board, credible, transparent, and no cover-ups. I'm intrigued by Michael Rubin's statement, which I've heard before, but he's really elaborated in detail in his written testimony about the whole idea of human rights fraud and how important it is that human rights defenders, human rights organizations, members of Congress, members everywhere, including in the Liberian legislature, be absolutely free of malicious intent, of biases. I know one of the things, and I know Evelyn, you probably, or Ms. Evanson, you know this, but Mr. Rubin points out that Human Rights Watch did a study, and he has three things that he talks about in terms of human rights fraud: corruption of methodology, outright falsehood, and then pay to play. And on the second, outright falsehood, he talks about a human rights report that was done in 2017 that said the Rwandan police had murdered a number of petty criminals. The Rwandan government subsequently produced those individuals very much alive. So that was fabricated, unless you can counter that. Now, from my point of view, I'm no great fan of Kagame. Rwanda, I had many hearings on his abuses of human rights over the years, including his inner cabinet, where he put hits on his own people. And I was in a very serious combat with the State Department, which was in denial at first until they heard the actual recordings of Kagame making those and his people putting a hit on one of his own people. So I'm no friend of Kagame. I think he has a miserable human rights record, and yet you still have to get it right. Was that a false report that was put out by Human Rights in 2017?
Thank you for the question.
Yes.
And if I understand it correctly, no. I'm happy to share for the record after this hearing a subsequent follow-up that we did on that report, documenting that victims' families had actually been coerced by the Rwandan government to provide misleading information about the whereabouts of their family members. And I also believe that our reporting was corroborated.
But were they killed? What I'm trying to get at is that credibility it's everything. We all make mistakes. Believe me, I know that. But we want to get it right, and we don't want information, human rights information, or players who have an agenda in any way involved with a process. As again, Mr. Rubin said, the people of Liberia deserve better than just anything but a completely transparent, no holds bar, goes after the perpetrators of these heinous crimes and jail them to the maximum extent possible, just like Charles Taylor got 50 years and is spending those 50 years, and he'll be in jail to the day he dies. So that's my intent, to get it right, to be absolutely honest. And I know we're dealing with personnel; people can get it wrong sometimes. He even put in his statement, and I hadn't remembered this, but the Friends Committee had supported the Khmer Rouge, or at least put a whitewash on him. And he mentioned that he might want to elaborate on that. So we've got to make sure that statements made by everyone, including human rights defenders, are as unbiased as humanly possible, because this court can play a major role. As we all know, we've been pushing for it for years. I and others in the Congress, House and Senate, and Ellen White has been pushing it for years as well, and others, to get it right and make sure those who have committed. And just parenthetically, I was very involved with the Rwanda, with the with the court for the former Yugoslavia, and I remember, it was designed to fail at first. At least that was the allegation, and it had credibility that it was. It was being underfunded. Information about terrible atrocities that were committed. If you don't interview people in a timely fashion, some of that evaporates. It's hard to hold people to account. Milosevic never thought that he'd ever face a criminal tribunal. I met with him in Belgrade. The man was certifiable. He was a dictator of the worst sort. And yet he thought he would never spend a moment in prison or even be held accountable. And yet he was. He died, of course, before the outcome was concluded. But it was, we learned a lot of lessons from that court, as we did with all the other courts. And hopefully all those can coalesce around how do we make this one the best that has ever been done, to make sure that justice is done. So I do hope Michael Rubin's thought about human rights falsehoods be taken very seriously. No matter who it is that is being lodged against. There's people in every administration that gets it wrong. whether I don't care what party it is. So I do ask you to keep that in mind. I'm going to ask the Inspector General to look into these concerns for the U.S. Department of State. I don't know if they'll accept it. I hope they will. If not, I'll offer an amendment to the relevant piece of legislation when it's making its way, whether it be the appropriations bill, requesting that. We got to be transparent and make sure that there's no hidden agendas in any of this. And that's all I want. No cover up whatsoever. Mr. White, you in your testimony mentioned some of the NGOs and their leaders you referenced. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, thank you. I get no pleasure out of mentioning things like this. I think the vast majority of the human rights NGOs, at least that I've dealt with, are honorable, reputable. But you're right, we got to get this right. And there is people that are taking advantage of this opportunity. And that's why it's so important with the title of this, the next steps, that we get it right. And we make sure that nobody that has serious allegations against them are involved in this. And these aren't just minor allegations. If I can I indulge just for a minute? I became aware of Elaine Werner and Civitas Maxima. As you know, he used to work with me at the Special Court for Sierra Leone. So I've known him for a number of years. And I know after he left the court, he contacted a number of my witnesses that I relocated, and they contacted me and asked me, how did he get my contact details? How did this happen? He wants me to be a witness on cases. I don't want any part of this. So this has been going on for a very long time. And when my first incident involving Elaine Werner and Hassan Biladi providing false information was, little did they know that Michel de Satelier, who was mentioned earlier today, was an informant for me at the special court. Okay. I knew his wife, I knew his family, I knew his children. And I knew that the allegations that were made against him were completely false. And I was called as a witness by the Belgian police to be interviewed. And I was interviewed in March of 2016. And when I heard these allegations that he was gun running, he was eating people, he was killing people, I said, where did you get this information? And the vast majority of it was from Civitas Maxima and Hassan Biladi. So that was Elaine Werner and Hassan Biladi. I said, this is absolutely false. He was an informant of mine, and I know he didn't commit these things. And I also know that this has destroyed his family. He was distraught. He could not defend himself on this case because they would not let him out on bail. He became distraught and killed himself, committed suicide. You know what? His wife was devastated, left in financial ruins. You get no insurance policy money when a spouse commits suicide. His two children, who I knew very young, have now grown up. They grew up fearing drug addiction and wanting to kill themselves. This is what I know. This is a bridge too far with what these guys have done. That was my first experience with them. And then when he killed himself, the family was just so devastated. They didn't want this pursued at that time. So what happens in 2020? I get a contact by the defense counsel of Jabril Massaquoi that he's been arrested based on information that was provided by Civitas Maxima, Elaine Werner, and Hassan Biladi. And these were statements that they prepared. They met with the NBI. They produced this information and said that even though he had immunity from being prosecuted in Sierra Leone, he had committed all of these atrocities in Liberia. And I said, when did this occur? And they claimed that it was in 2003. I said, 2002, October of 2002, he was in my witness protection program. He was an insider witness. So there is no way that he could have been there. And I knew that. The sad thing was he had to go through 4 years, a trial and then an appellate trial. Okay. His family was devastated. He was accused of eating people, killing people, and all of these things in the Finnish press without any iota of evidence other than statements that were produced. Now, I will take exception to what my colleague said from Human Rights Watch. These cases, the cases that they've been involved in, are all generated by the statements that Hassan Biladi and Elaine Werner produce to the police. This has happened everywhere. Even the British police came to me and asked for my help to resurrect their case against Agnes Reeves Taylor. What we found out during that process was that a lot of the information was completely false. Where did that information come from? Civitas Maxima and also Global Justice Research Project. And it was based on statements that they produced. And the way that this works is they go back to the country and they are led around by these NGOs. You need to talk to this person, this person. And they say exactly what was in that statement. Okay. So I know for a fact, and I know with the Hassan Biladi case, that this case was fraught with fraud beginning to end. And when this is how we got to know International Justice Group, because what they did because of COVID-19, they moved the trial from Finland down to Monrovia. Even though they couldn't see the witness, they could hear the witness. And when they were listening to the witnesses, a number of people in Liberia said, look, this is false. How can we get this to the Defense Council? That's when I found out the International Justice Group reached out to me and said, look, we have a number of witnesses because we've been investigating this for 10 years. Okay. We had an insider that was reporting this information. So the Defense Council asked me if I would contact those witnesses, get a summary of information and get back to them, and if they would be willing to cooperate. And I did. Guess what Hassan Biladi did under oath? He testified that I was witness tampering and interfering with witnesses. I did not know this because this was going on in Finland, and I did not get to see that. So he continuously provided false information, to include claiming that Jibril Massaquoi had tortured him. That was debunked immediately when we had a witness that was incarcerated with him at the same time when this allegation surfaced. Even the judges in the first acquittal, in their written summary, they questioned the credibility of Hassan Biladi 3 times because he changed his story 3 times. So I wish I didn't have to bring this up, but this came to me. Okay, this information came to me, and I know for a fact that this information was false, particularly on the Jibril Massaquoi case, on the Michelle de Saddler case. Sadly, we cannot do anything about that. And even the Agnes Reeves case, that's where we uncovered Amos Bond was alive and living in the UK. And that information has been passed on to the British authorities. I don't know what they're doing with it, but this is how these allegations come up. And just because they haven't been criminally convicted yet doesn't mean they're not true, because the witnesses did, under oath, second time around on the appeal side, did admit that the first time they ever saw Jibril Massaquoi was when somebody from Global Justice Research Project has showed them a picture. Okay, these are facts. There has been 2 criminal complaints filed in Liberia. We'll see what happens. There's a new government, a new willingness to investigate these things. And so we'll see what happens there. But my point is, the people that have these type of allegations with founded information, despite any criminal conviction, should not be anywhere near this court, period. Okay. And the U.S. government should find out why this State Department continues to support these people with these serious allegations when they know this. That is, that defies logic. So that's what I would like the Congress to do. Ask the Inspector General to take a look at that. And it's not just State Department. There are other government agencies that are using these people, and their cases have fallen into question about using some of their witnesses. So this is a serious issue, and it's consistent with our theme today is, and as we move forward, we have to get this right. And we have to make sure anybody that's been criminally accused, where there is evidence to support that, is not involved in this court. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rubin wanted to comment, I'm told. Michael Rubin?
Thank you very much. Let me just address a few of the issues that have come up. The top line is there is consensus about the need for U.S. support for the War and Economics Crimes Court, and hopefully for the Anti-Corruption Court as well. The only question is in the details. I would say this: no organization should be immune to criticism. And frankly, when the evidence is damning that certain organizations did not operate in good faith. It is simply wrong to say and to dismiss criticism as as, look, this just endangers us, it's intimidation. Criticism does not always endanger lives. Too often, however, human rights groups use this idea that criticism endangers lives to sidestep legitimate criticism. You know, one thing I want to point out, and I made reference to this in my written testimony, Elaine Warner tried to compel my retraction and that of my publisher, at the time the Washington Examiner, but he dropped efforts when it became clear I would hold my ground and he could face discovery. The question then becomes, why was he so afraid to face discovery? And should a human rights group really try to use lawfare in order to, if you will, restrict free speech, and in this case, very valid research? Now, Chairman Smith, in my written research, in my written testimony, I gave very specific examples of human rights fraud. It's important to understand, however, how groups make money from this. By taking the lead and even getting convictions on what later transpired to be falsehood, groups can receive grants from groups like the Center for Justice and Accountability or the State Department. I'm not alleging that Ambassador Beth Van Schaak profited personally. What I am alleging is that she did not conduct due diligence, and because of that, her reputation in Liberia is soiled because of her association and then digging in her heels with regard to certain groups which are now under the spotlight. I would also mention that USAID, for example, has given grants to groups affiliated with Hamas. This is now under investigation. The problem is lack of due diligence. At any rate, I can respond to other questions later, but let me return the time back.
Any of you other witnesses like to respond to? Yes, please.
Yes, yes. Can I come, sir?
Mr. Dempster, is that you?
Yes, yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so Congressman Smith, thank you again. I have a couple of concerns, and I think it's important for this hearing. As a human rights defendant in Liberia, I live in Liberia all through my life, and I work within the human rights defender space, civil society. As a matter of fact, I spoke with the co-chair, the chairperson of the NGO Council in Liberia just before I came to this hearing. And there are a number of things that we are concerned with, because I heard that Dr. White is working with a number of NGO, credible NGOs. We are interested to know their names. That is very important and vital for our work, because we've been working on war crimes, like I said, from 20 years plus. And if that is the case, we are interested to know the names of those organizations. The next point here, it has to do with, you mentioned, Mr. Chair, that we have to do this right. And doing it right, there has to be a level of honesty attached to what we want to do right. I mean, I heard all the allegations, and I'm going to say again, these allegations are grave, and in a greater extent, the pullback helped to stall and delay our achievement for the war crimes could be established. And if this go back to our society, it's troublesome. We have the Bar Association, the Traditional Council, the Interreligious Council, the Liberal Council of Churches, Youth and Women Group, that will all work on war crimes issues in this republic. And most of whom want to hear and following this technical discussion today, I mean, there's going to be a huge feedback coming to what is being played out. My other concern has to do with former chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, who was decommissioned, and he authored a report that we are advocating to see the recommendations being implemented in the spirit of honesty and due diligence. How positive and possible it is for him to have been decommissioned as a chairman of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and then he come by and form an NGO to implement the same report. This is a serious concern for us. Is that the normal practice? Because we're talking about doing it right. And of course, honesty has to be attached to it. It's very important for us to hear on this matter, because we are setting the stage to do these things right. And my next concern, I'm saying it because This is important for the human rights community and the civil society. I'm going to put this question to Mr. Alvin Smith. He was in Monrovia recently and we caught up at a local hotel. He was found with certain gentlemen. I want him to kindly inform this hearing. Who are those gentlemen? I will yield back with my own insights and identification of these identical people because we want to do it right. If we're saying Hassan Benedict and other people are not doing it right, then of course, people who are accusing this group should be able to prove that they are doing these things right so that it does not create conflict. Right now, the president, the government, they are in the process of having the office established. But with all of what's happening now, it has to be another thinking. We have 1 year executive order, and we are around the table right now, holding and pulling on issues that I think need to be verified. And the next point has to do with if the recommendations are stopping CJA, stopping Civitas, stopping Ambassador Buckshot, and human rights and other people from being around the establishment of the court, then what can I say? Because I have worked with this institution, and all of the time of my workings with this institution, including the office of GCJ of recent time, I am unable to present anything that have been proven to be counterproductive. So the local embassy, U.S. Embassy in Monrovia, we have constant briefings on these matters, on war crime issues, on other human rights issues. We work with them. They are not giving us any feedback of the kind of allegations we're hearing. It's worrisome for the human rights community. And I think the media community in Liberia, they are following this hearing. It's worth that we do it right, but we have to do it with honesty.
Thank you.
Chairman Smith, may I come in, please?
Oh,
Alam, right?
okay, go ahead, Mr. Smith, and then I'll go to Ms. Martin.
Yeah, my name is Investigator Alvin Smith, International Justice Group. I want to respond to my fellow witness, Adam Ketama Dempster. When I got to Monrovia, conducting my usual investigation, there were two journalists who were concerned to meet with me. One Mr. Lionel Pony and one Socrates Smith Sewon. And my insider witness, Dara Stewart. There's a guy called Michael Sonnegar Davis. Michael Sonnegar Davis. This man was falsely accused during the TRC hearing in Grand Bassa County. The International Justice Group conducted a forensic investigation, and I will submit the funding of that investigation to this committee to counter-check. He was with me. He came to the hotel to tell me the remaining stories that were documented. And Mr. Dempster saw him with me, along with Director, the insider witness that have been collaborating with Mr. Ability for many years, that were reporting to us on all the cases in Western Europe and the United States, all the fraudulent cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. I think I come from a different spectrum here. I am a survivor. I am one of the millions of people who were displaced and never had a home to go to. And I bless God that there is United States. This is appalling for me looking at this because I'm speaking for almost 2.some million Liberian women, children who were ripped, who were killed, who were dragged across the border, who were forced to fight. What I want out of there is justice with no reservation, no selective. Justice should be blind and should be just and transparent. While we commend all those who have worked, I spent 34 years of my life, that's all of my adult life. We from the diaspora made it our duty to go to Liberia, work with Liberians on the ground, to collect over 300,000 signatures to prove that the Liberian people do want justice and accountability. This is what we hope for. This is what the quest is. What has happened needs to be investigated. Let's get the truth. Let's get this court going. Some of us do not have another 30 years to live. If we did, we may not even remember. But this is the scar that we live with every day and that we'll continue to live with until we are called home. So let's find the truth, Chairman Smith. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here. Pauline, take your time, investigate. Let's get to the court. Let's get those who are credible that can bring this code, that everyone, those who did not commit the crime can have their day. Those who did can go to jail, especially those who bear the greatest responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just ask one general question I'll ask at the end, but just again to Ms. Evanson, just so I'm clear and the record's clear, Human Rights Watch in 2017 did not put out a report that these criminals have been killed by the Gaddafi regime. Again, going to Mr. Rubin's point about human rights fraud, I have chaired 4 congressional hearings in the last 12 months alone on the UN Relief Works Agency, UNRWA, and it's incredible. Creating child soldiers, the teaching of anti-Semitism, which is rampant throughout the UNRWA school system. I've had many hearings over the last many years. I've met with UNRWA individuals, including the people who run it here, the advocates here in Washington and elsewhere. And it's always, oh, we're making it better, it's making it better. And the UN puts out a report that whitewashes so much of this. It focused just narrowly on the few who, and it's not so few, but the ones that they identified, some a dozen or so, that committed crimes on October 7th. And as if turn that page, they're dealt with, and UNRWA is the clean, and a lot of the human rights organizations went along with that. I read the report and I was shocked by it. So I did a hearing just on the report. And it was just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And it was devastating, just how falsification had occurred, a abuse of human rights leaders and people who say things and to suggest that somehow UNRWA has not created a whole group. I consider what UNRWA does to young Palestinian youth to be child abuse. They teach them to hate. They inculcate in them the Hamas Charter of 1988, which says if you see a Jew, even the rocks will cry out. If the Jew is hiding behind the rocks, will say, "There's a Jew here, come and kill him." I mean, you got to read these things to know what's at the core of it. And yet so much of what is produced by UNRWA and others gets picked up by human rights organizations as if it's somehow credible. And it needs a great deal of discernment in doing that. So just so I'm clear on your testimony, that did not happen. Is Mr. Rubin wrong about his statement in his testimony? I'll read it to you if you want.
No, thank you. I think I understood.
Good.
I think he's left out an important further fact, which is that we did a follow-up report to look at the claims that the Rwandan government made about our initial report, and we stand behind our findings. And I'm very happy to share that
But
follow-up.
are those findings that it did not happen? These people were not killed by Kagame?
The findings were that our original report remains substantiated.
So he did kill them?
Well, not him personally.
No, his people, his
Yeah,
regime.
the findings that we had in our original report remain, we stand behind them. And I would say it's incredibly important to us to be rigorous in our methodology. That's what our credibility and our ability to affect the change on behalf of people in the world depends on it. So when we get it wrong, we absolutely do say that we get it wrong.
But you didn't get
And
that
we,
one wrong.
we did not get that one wrong.
Mr. Rubin might want to
And we
comment.
also make
Yeah.
clear in all of our reporting our methodology. So anyone can look and see and assess for themselves whether and how we've done it. And I really hope that this debate today doesn't distract from the theme.
Distract. To the
of
contrary,
the
what this
hearing.
debate is all about is getting it right.
Exactly. And getting it right, I think there's such incredible scope for the U.S. to support this
That's what we're
incredible
trying to get the
momentum
U.S. to do,
we have
all
right
that's
now on this
possible.
War Crimes Court.
Right.
Thank you.
Including funding.
Including funding.
Can any of you speak to Mr. Rubin? Did you want to respond to that or not?
I would just say that they were not killed, they were found in prison. And so the actual content of the report was wrong. I'm not saying that Paul Kagame's human rights record is spectacular or whatever,
I don't
but
either.
also in my written testimony, I also gave the example of Paul Karama, which was founded by a US designated Al-Qaeda financier. He cynically created his own human rights group called Al-Karama, and Human Rights Watch, the Middle East Division, had uncritically accepted many of the pronouncements which Al-Karama had made. All I'm saying is across the board, there's a lack of due diligence, and too often people will make the argument that criticism endangers lives as a way to avoid taking institutional accountability for the perversion of some of the methodology.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin. Let me ask one final question, if you could, and all of you might want to respond to it. How much do you think the United States government should be providing, and the European Union, others hopefully will be all helpful in this as well? And what lessons might Liberia draw from the war crimes tribunals in other post-conflict countries, particularly the Court for Sierra Leone, which obviously Dr. White is so intimately familiar with? Lessons learned so that, all of that can now be applied here.
As I mentioned in 2021 at my hearing, nobody knows exactly how much it's going to cost. However, as a good starting point, we had an annual budget of $35 million, and seed funding will certainly need to be provided and reprogrammed with the approval of Congress, no doubt. And then an annual appropriation should be built in. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to talk today for many reasons. That was really the number one concern that we had at the court, was to make sure that it was properly funded, because it was based on voluntary contributions. And although well thought out, and they didn't really want it to report under the UN, but they wanted to have the UN trappings of international authority, the court struggled. So we scrambled every year to get funding, and that's a problem. So the U.S. government, because of our historical ties, is a point that I made. I think the Congress should take the lead on this, make sure that they get the proper money, get it started upright, and then also to make sure that it's built in a significant annual appropriation and authorized for this court, so that we don't have any impact on operations and it's sustainable. Now, it needs to be run correctly, and I get all that, and it needs to be done because Sierra Leone was not perfect, but the lessons learned, we can fix some of those things with the rules of procedure, motions, instead of taking months or maybe even a year. Those things should be done differently. But funding, without a doubt, and that's why this hearing was so important, because that's going to be critical to the next step, is, okay, now we have the political will to do this. Who's going to pay for it? Because the previous government left Liberia virtually penniless, so they don't have the requisite funding to do it. So I am arguing that the U.S. has a responsibility to support this and get it funded and get it up and running. And those adjustments could be made as necessary, but we have to have the willingness to do that and do it now. Thank you.
The question was lessons learned from previous courts, especially Sierra Leone, and the cost. Any estimates what you think we should be doing as the U.S. government and other interested parties like the European Union and others? Butcher. Thank you.
I agree with him, but I wanted to provide you just 1 minute information.
Okay.
All right. In the affidavit against Agnes Taylor for Aliyu Vavle Kane, there were a number of Liberians listed there by ability and honor that Aliyu Vavle Kane could not go back home because of the presence of these people in Liberia. Joel Howard Taylor, former vice president, Mr. Eugene Nangwe, former minister of information, Mr. Abraham Krumah, the suspended DA boss, and one Robert Bier, who was a lawyer at the Liberia Petroleum Refinery Company. I'm prepared to submit a lot of documents from these fraudulent cases, both in the U.S. and Western Europe. Thank you, sir.
Please provide that to us. Mr. Rubin? Mr. Rubin, you had something you wanted to add?
Yes, just very briefly, I would say one of the lessons from the past is also the need for speed. Going back to Rwanda, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda took over a decade and more than $1 billion, but ultimately convicted only 85 participants. It's essential to balance, to find ways to increase speed, especially since we're dealing with issues that in some cases occurred more than 20 years ago, and therefore would we have to deal with just the lifespan of witnesses and so forth.
Thank you. Yes.
If I could just add on your question about lessons learned and funding, and the two are relevant to each other. I think one thing that's very exciting is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report was in 2009, and we have another 14, 15 years now of practice in what does it mean to have credible national proceedings supported by the international community. So we have the Special Court for Sierra Leone model, and I think that probably remains the best model for Liberia. But we also have really interesting developments that have taken place in the Central African Republic, that are under discussion now in Gambia, that have happened in Guinea, of matching a nationally led process with the international support that's required. So I think this is the discussion that many are eager to get to. How do we do this? How do we take lessons from the various different examples that we have? And I can't agree more. One of the lessons is that court personnel shouldn't have to spend their time fundraising. They should know that there is a solid basis of support, and that could be done through annual appropriations, earmarking, for example, on the part of the U.S. Congress, so that they can focus on their primary job, which is to bring justice for victims. Thank you.
I want to thank all of our very distinguished witnesses for your insights, your counsel, your testimony, and your leadership. If there's anything further that you would like us to have, please provide it to us. In terms of adding to the court record. This hearing, therefore, is adjourned, and I thank you again.